So today we're going to begin to add some of the details, like how to add a billboard or a sign, maybe even a light post, or anything else you can think of as your creative detail. And then just reminding how to put text in, which you've practiced before, but you might need a reminder. And I'm going to start by just making sure that something that was tricky where we ended last time was the sidewalks, that those are clear. So I'm going to do an example on that. For you, you're going to get your project out. Most of you guys should be around here. You have at least 3 buildings, and they each have either windows and or a door. And you can always change these and add more as you're going. And then you have your road with a dash, and you should have 2 sidewalks, and each sidewalk has a curb, right? So these were kind of tricky, so I'm going to redo those with you guys. So in my layer of my sidewalks, I'm just going to hide them. They're not going to go anywhere, and I'm going to do a little example here. In my sidewalks, I wanted them to be lighter than the road, but darker than the ground. So I'm going to grab my rectangle tool, and I'm going to choose a middle color. And then I'm going to make sure that I'm in my perspective grid, right? And I have the little widget, and that widget is active on the left grid, or the blue, the dark blue. So with making sure that the sidewalk layer is activated, you're going to put in, make sure that your perspective grid is active in green, right? And you guys probably caught that when I said that. You're going to start from the edge of the artboard or even beyond, such as over here. And then you're going to draw until the vanishing point. And it's okay if your sidewalk ends a little bit before your road, or it's a little bit on your road. Obviously this isn't what we want. So what I'm going to do is grab my perspective selection tool, Shift V, and just resize that. So you can do that too. You'll probably find that when you're working on the ground planes, or this ground can also be the roof plane if you were doing something like that. It can be kind of sensitive, so you need that perspective selection tool to resize things the way you want. So what I meant is you can have that gap, right? I'm just going to select this because I don't want to fill. No, I do want to fill, but I don't want to stroke. Okay. So now I have my sidewalk. Because this layer is below my buildings, the work shows up below the buildings, right? Even though it goes beyond where the buildings sit as objects, okay? So now how did I make that curb? So now we have this color for the sidewalk, this color for the ground, and like this color I think for the road. So for my curb, I want it to be just a little bit darker than the sidewalk, but a little bit lighter than the road, so I can see it. And it's going to look like we want to give the illusion that it's like a step down. Some of you have thought about being creative. You kind of put like a fire lane in as your curb. That's cool. You can do the red, you can make it yellow, you can make it white, colors that you see around the city that are painted on the curbs that mean different things, or green, for example. So I'm just going to do a gray, but I need to make sure I'm in my rectangle tool, and now I've switched over to blue. So that's the trick. To do the side of the curb, you need to be in blue. And then make sure you're in the color that you want. I'm going a little bit darker. You might want to do lighter, it's up to you, or paint your curb, that's fine. And again, I'm just going to start right where my sidewalk is, and then I'm going to draw all the way to the vanishing point. And not too worried if it doesn't fit perfectly, because if it doesn't, I just go to Shift V, or grab that selection tool, and notice how I'm zooming in to make things easier for me, things that are harder to see over here. When I zoom in with Command plus, I can see what I'm doing, and I can extend it all the way over. Okay. So now Command minus to see my work. And remember, you can at any time hit Shift Command I and then just hide your grid. Your grid's not going anywhere, it hasn't changed, you're just hiding it so you can see your work, right? And then Shift Command I. So if you need to, you can watch me do the sidewalk one more time. Otherwise, you can kind of skip forward where I'm talking about getting in the billboards and text. So for the other side, one more time, You select the sidewalk layer. You're in the rectangle tool. You're in green. You draw on the other side your sidewalk. Not too worried about size of the object because you can always resize it. I'm going to hit my, while this object is selected, I'm going to hit my eyedrop tool, and just go over to my other sidewalk and tell it to be the same. And then I'm going to go back to my perspective selection tool. So you guys might be doing some of these things. You might just be watching me do a couple things that you're not doing. And then the trick is rectangle tool. We're in dark blue. I start at the corner of my sidewalk and I put in my curb. As far as I can for right now, eyedrop tool, and select the curb. Well, that's selected, so that's the same. Shift V, Command plus, and grab and extend. And just line it up as best you can. Okay? And so there's my second sidewalk. Shift Command I to hide the grid. And you can see what we've done so far. So the one thing I wanted to let you guys know is, remember, you can always work outside the artboard. It's just whatever's in this bounding box is what's going to be printed. So your road should extend off, your sidewalk should extend off so that it doesn't look like your road just starts out of nowhere here, right? It's as if you're like standing right here, right? And you're looking back. Okay, so that was the example. And now we're going to talk about the billboard. If you want to do a billboard, how you would do that, and text. So everybody needs to do something. It could be a billboard, it could be a sign, it could be a light post. And I'm going to show you guys a billboard. So I'm going to go up to my top layer and select it, and then press New Layer and name that billboard, or whatever you end up choosing to do. And make one more layer and name that text. So in your billboard sign layer, and that might be your light post layer or whatever you'd like to do, you're going to click and activate that, and you're going to choose where you'd like your billboard to be. So I'm going to put my billboard, I'm going to put it, you could put it on top of a building, and that might look something like my example here, the way I did here. All right. So you can see I have this on a blue plane, this is flat, and this is actually on the ground or the roof plane. And then these are two little bars that I can show you how to do that with. All right. But for today, I'm going to put a billboard just freestanding right here. I'm going to bring my grid back up, Shift Command I, and I'm going to go to my rectangle tool, choose a color for my billboard. I'll go with white for right now, and you can choose your own. I'm just going to go over there and go ahead and draw your billboard in, and then Shift V to just move that over. It's not exactly where I want it to be. I'm going to put it there, a little bit over. Okay. And then I'm going to put in the bottom. So let me zoom in here. Switch my rectangle tool to the ground plane. And I'm going to tell it to be a little bit darker. So that was white, and I'm just going to pick like a light gray. You could pick like a light tan or something too. And you're going to begin at one end and draw to the other end. Letting go. So there's my bottom. And then I'm going to go back to my widget and tell it to deactivate. And I'm going to make sure this is a flat shape. So I'm going to start at the side. And I'll probably choose like maybe one lighter color than it was, so you can see the difference between my ground and my side. So when I zoom in, I click off, you can see that these guys should be matching up. So that's matching up, this is matching up to this, but this is not matching up to that. So I'm going to go back to Shift V, which you might have to do, and resize that so the edges touch. And you can see those little anchor points, they light up when you kind of click on. All right, so now when I click off, there's my billboard. Okay, so this was blue, this was the ground or the roof, and that was flat. All right, and then how do we make like little posts? So if you wanted to make posts, you have two ways. Making sure you're in your billboard layer still. Do the line tool. Shortcut is L. Or I'm sorry, the shortcut is a little slash. And what you're going to do is you're going to hold shift and make sure you're not active in your perspective grid. Hold shift and draw down. Hold shift and draw down. Oops, looks like somehow I got into my sky layer. So hold shift, and that helps make it straight. And we can fix these being behind it later. So I'm going to go to my selection tool and just select these. I want this to be a little bit thicker, so I'm going to tell its stroke to be like maybe 5 points. And since it's an outline, I'm going to tell it to be a little bit lighter. This can be a little bit thinner, but not as thick as that, so I'm going to make that maybe 3 points. And again, it should be the same color as that, so a quick way is just grab the eyedrop tool while it's selected and click there. Okay, so now let's go and open this layer. We need to make sure that these two objects, which are the little poles, are actually behind here, because this makes up my billboard. All right, so what we're going to do is just grab these paths and tell them to go behind, but stay in that layer. You can see they adjusted, they went behind. Okay, so that is the poles. That like a 4. Okay, and it's up to you how you're going to do your text. So you might have text on the billboard and that works. You might put text on the side of a building that's relevant. You might make a sign that's like a coffee sign or a cafe sign and you have text there. Or you might even put a sign like a text on the ground, like one way or stop or something like that. And remember that you write the text on the side of your artboard and then you bring your perspective selection tool and drag it over. So I'll do a couple with you guys on my example here. We're just going to activate the text layer. I'm going to close this layer. Okay. T for text. And write your text. Choose the font style, the color, and everything like that. You can choose a size. You're probably going to want to make it relatively large because the perspective selection tool likes to make these small. And then you're going to go to your perspective selection tool. Make sure you're in blue because we're going to put, for my example, I'm going to grab this and put it on the billboard. Now I want to resize that. And this guy's backwards, so we're going to just peel and bring it over. If you want to resize it so that it stays the same, you hold down shift and keep things proportionate. Okay, if you're not too worried about it, you can kind of eyeball it, then you can do what I'm doing. Not holding down shift and just grabbing the corners. Okay, so I'm going to click off so you can see. There we go. So that's one way of doing it. And again, you guys might put it on your building somewhere. You might put it on the ground somewhere. Either works. You just need one thing of text at least. All right, so I'm going to just wrap up showing you guys how to do some extra details, like put in a background maybe, put in some trees, maybe put in like a little park or a different kind of road that's going off to a different direction. So you only need to do a couple of these. It's up to you. But I do want you guys to know what your options are and some things that Illustrator already has ready for you. So you do need to make some layers. So I'll show you guys to start off putting in like a section of grass. And I'll show you guys how to put in clouds and mountains as a background and maybe some trees. Okay, so Those are probably going to be towards the back. And because of that, that means they need to be behind these. So that needs to be behind these layers. So they wouldn't be layers that are above. So they're probably going to be layers that are on top of our sidewalk and ground, but below the buildings. So they're behind. Now, if you want to put some trees that are in front of your buildings, then you need to make your layers go on top of that. So I'll make a couple layers, one that's trees and one that's grass. One more that's mountains. And then we'll wrap it up with some clouds. Okay, so that will be what I go over with you guys today. So let's put in, I'll do the grass with you guys first, and then we'll build the trees, the mountains, and clouds. So grass, activate that. It's pretty simple. You can activate, deactivate your grid, and let's say that I want to do a lighter shade of grass on the other side. And I'm just going to draw that in. So that would be another way of doing it, okay? But then in this case, your sidewalk and your road would need to be on top. And by doing it as a flat shape, then you need to be aware of having the sidewalks and the ground be on top, right? So the roads, for example. So now going to trees and clouds. So trees and clouds, you can make your own, that's fine, but Illustrator does have some things that are already made for you. So I'm just going to go to Window and go to Symbols. And there's some basic ones that pop up, but we're going to go to that little library of symbols. And we're going to check out, nature has some of the things we might want. Like these clouds, okay? So in this panel, this is our symbols panel. I want to actually build my symbols library, so I'm going to just click and drag these over until that little green sign pops up. And I don't know which cloud I want to use. I'm just going to bring them all over. I think there's 3. Take a look at what else is there. There's some grass. You could add that if you wanted, different types. There's some foliage, which are like plants and bushes. Grass for texture. You know, something that you think you might use. You know, I don't know if we'd be using leaves. You might use rocks. Might look kind of funny. But they have a couple trees that are options as well. So I'm just going to click and drag those, okay? So again, I got those from the symbols panel from the window menu, and then I just used the little library in that panel. And that's probably where most of us will go. I mean, there's a bunch of other symbols, but you might not. You're welcome to look through any of those and see how you could use them. You could use them in a billboard or building or something. But it's mostly going to be nature for us, so it's pretty easy. Once you have your symbols here, you just click the ones you want and you just drag them over, and then you just resize them to what you'd like them to be, right? And because my clouds are one of the bottom layers, then I can put it behind my billboard and we'll go over. And remember, you can always make copies of things by holding Alt Option. So if I like that, but I want to resize it, make it smaller. You can try other clouds, see what they look like. So you probably don't want to overkill cloud. Just keep that in mind. Just put a few where it works, not too busy. And the same thing with trees. So you can click and drag, and they're a little object, and then you can resize. If you want it to be perfectly proportionate, then you hold Shift. So I'm going to just make sure my tree layer is where I want it. Activate and click it. Bring some trees over. And I'm just going to put it in that little park area. Okay, so you can bring your symbols right over. That with just these trees. So if they're smaller, they probably look like they're going farther away. And if they're bigger or in front of things, then they look like they're coming closer. So to add something like grass, You don't necessarily have to put that in perspective. Like I said, these symbols can definitely be put in which is a regular selection tool. So, and not look too funny for the most part. So I'm just going to make sure I grab my regular selection tool, and I had brought over a few different pieces of grass, and I'm going to put some of this grass like this over by my billboard, and just going to resize it. Remember, if things are farther away, they're smaller. So how I did that was I just grabbed from my symbols and dragged, right? And once you've done that, you can just always take what you have and make a copy. So I'll option and then just resize. If you want proportionate, hold shift. If you don't mind, then just let the corners and the tool drag it from the corner. And I'm making this smaller because it's farther away from there. So you can see what that would look like. Okay, you have other foliages options around here. Okay, so you guys can play around with that. So we did clouds, we did trees, we did grass. And again, you can put them anywhere. I just happen to put them in the back here. And next we're going to take a look at how to do something like a mountain. You might want a mountain. You have two options when it comes to something like that. So I'm going to show you guys the pen tool, and I'm going to show you the pencil tool. And you'll probably like the pencil tool, but the pen tool can be nice if you're just doing kind of like a jaggedy mountain. So I'm going to go to my mountains layer. Now again, you guys don't need to do this. You don't have to, but this is just one creative thing you could do. I want my clouds to be over my mountain, so I'm noticing that. I'm going to rearrange that layer. So the pen tool is up here, and its shortcut is P. And we want this to be behind the buildings because it's the background. And you're going to see that the mountains would be right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my mountains off the artboard first. And so the pen tool is just all about kind of clicking. So these are just some jaggedy mountains. But we want to make an object. So the trick is you have to end a point where you started a point. So I started here. So in my pen tool, I need to end there. And you can see that little circle pops up, which means it's about to close this and make a shape, which means I can put it as a fill. And I'm going to do like a light purple. I don't want a gradient for that. Let's see, that was accidentally done in my clouds by accident, so I'm just going to open my layer, and here it is. It's selected. Take that rectangle and just put it where it belongs. Okay. Close that layer. And so now you have this object, and you can bring it over. And then you can resize it and place it where you'd like. So it might look like something like that, right? Another option is you leave it here, right? And you might want to redo it or try using it again, so in case something goes wrong, and just making a copy. So that's always there in case you need it. And I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller. So I drew my object. I'm just going to place it. All right, so you might want that to be a different color or gradient, and I'm going to use my copy of this to go behind here as like another little set of mountains. So I'm just going to make that a little bit darker. Grab this, make it like a grayish purple. And again, I'm just going to make a copy just in case. Bring it on over. And see how I'm only showing part of it, so that's why I moved this part over. So see, you have these taller mountains. And because it's a layer below the buildings, you don't see all this. So I like that color. I don't mind the size. It's a little dark for me, so one thing we're going to do is kind of soften that up, and I'll show you how to do that. So to soften a color up, you can lower the transparency of it. So that is in a panel over here, and it's two little circles right below the gradient panel. If you already have the gradient panel open, then it's in the gradient panel. Okay, so you can either open it yourself, or if you already have the gradient panel open, it's in there. So I grab this and I tell it to be a lower opacity, like maybe 80 maybe 50% of the color that it is, and you can see it looks softer. So I'm going to select my purple mountains and do the same thing. Just going to lower that just a little bit, like 90%. So now I have two little mountains, all right? And that's one way of doing it. Now, here's another way if you don't like the pen tool. The pencil tool. And the pencil tool, the shortcut is N. So when you hit N, you'll find it's right below the rectangle tool. So the pencil tool is a little bit different. You don't have to click, 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 but you can draw, just kind of free form, and it will do its best to make these little anchor points. But it's similar to the pen tool because you do need to close the shape. So where you start, you end. And that way it becomes an object that you can select and put a fill on, like that, right? So if you wanted like rounder mountains for some reason, then you can do that with a pencil tool. So you might like that look, okay? Or you might want to combine these two together. Again, I think it's a good idea to just make copies of what you've drawn. So pencil or pen to do something like a background like mountains, and you can use the opacity of things to make things that are farther look farther away, because things that are closer are nice and crisp and sharp. Things that are farther get a little bit more blurry and soft in focus. Okay, so that is your choice. So we've done the clouds, the trees, the grass, and we've done some mountains. There's just some extra creative touches. Then you would ideally make a layer and activate it. So I'm going to put a cafe sign right over here. This could be anything else. This doesn't have to be a cafe. So I'm going to start by making sure I'm in my perspective grid, and I just hid mine, so I'm hitting Shift-Command-I. You might still have yours. And I'm going to get my rectangle tool, and I'm going to tell it to be deactivated. And just right here, I'm going to draw in a flat rectangle shape that's going to look like my cafe sign. So let's see. I'm not going to make it too big. Just make this guy like a light gray. I'll make it medium gray or something. Okay. And then what we need is a small rectangle shape in blue. Okay, so that means our left side is going to be activated. I'm just going to make this a little bit darker. Oops. I'll draw it in and I'll do it. Kind of like the curb where you have a flat shape with the ground, or the billboard, I mean, and gives the illusion, right, that it has depth. Click off of it and make sure, click off in your selection tool. Make sure everything's lined up. So I'm just going to zoom in and see that it's not. So I grab that with my perspective selection tool and just kind of make sure that's attached to the corners. You might have a sign that, let's see, tall enough so you can see the bottom, or low enough so you can see the top. And in that case, which mine does not have either, like I can't see the top or the bottom, I don't need to do anything. But in that case, if you did, then you would put it in ground and make your top and your bottom in that. Okay, it'd be one or the other, top or bottom. So that's how you would do that. And then you would just put your text in the cafe sign. And the trick for something like this that's going down is in your text tool, you click and hold that down until you see the vertical type tool. And you can click here. And I just hid my, and then you can resize it. Get the font that you want, the color that you want. And that is how you would do something like that. Okay, so that's that. And then at this point, what you guys need to be making sure you're doing is that you have everything done the way you want. Everything looks the way you want. You have gradients where you want gradients. You have color where you want that color, and you have, the windows and doors where you want. Each building, even if you did more than 3, I would say should have some windows and doors. If you made a bunch of small buildings in the back, not too worried about that. But then, at the very end, you're just going to go to File and hit Save As, and make sure that it has, it can be your first initial or just your last name, .perspective project, and make sure it's an Illustrator, and save it. And then you're going to make one more copy. So you're going to hit File, Save As, and hit the shortcut, which is Shift-Command-S, and same name, but save it as a PDF, and save that where you'd like. All right. Let everything come up as default, that's fine, and save that as a PDF there. Take one last look at your work. So what I want is 2 things that you're going to submit. A screenshot of your work. So you're going to hold Shift-Command-4, and you're going to screenshot your work with your layers, like we had before in our skill practice assignments, and turn that into this project, okay? And the second thing is your PDF. So you're turning in at the very end a PDF file of this work and a screenshot of this work once it's done. And your grid should be hidden. It's okay if I see your grid on the screenshot, but that would be it.